Okay, I'm Christopher Robert Stum, and these are my co-hosts, Wes and Duncan. Today we're going to discuss gun control as it relates to the United States. So let's just jump into it with screen share to kind of initiate the conversation. Okay, and here we go. You guys ready?
Yep.
You have volume on?
What's that?
Do you have the volume up?
How's that?
I can't hear anything.
You can't hear anything?
I'm buffering over this end.
No, it's
Give me 1 second. Okay, we have someone watching. That's good. Let me see if I can reopen this. Let's go to this. You couldn't hear anything?
No, like total silence on this end.
Wes, drop me that link to that video.
I might as well just point out here that this has actually been very educational for me as an Australian. It's been very helpful for me to be able to get more of an insight onto how Americans view guns. Because this video has a wide range of different people, of different types of gun owners and everything like that. So it shows that you can't put them all together in one simple category too easily. You know what I mean?
Okay, I have the video and I'm ready to initiate the screen share now. Let me know if you guys can hear it this time, okay? Let's go to this one.
Men, women, Democrats, Republicans.
Can you hear that?
yeah.
Ranging in age from 19 to 67. Among them, a retired police officer, current school superintendent, and a nursing home activities director, all with differing opinions.
Who here thinks we need changes in laws?
Why? Why do we need changes in laws? That's silly.
I think there needs.
There's something wrong with my internet connection. Let me see if I can network. Yeah, I'm connected. It's slow.
Well, as you're saying before, basically everyone's online at the moment because everyone's in isolation. Well, everyone should be in isolation.
It could be.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna keep playing, and we'll see if we can.
Needs to be some changes from the universal background check, and I know there was a 10-year ban on assault rifles. I don't know why we need those guns. If people want to shoot them, maybe there's a range where they can go and they can check out the gun, shoot them, enjoy that.
Larry, you have more than 100 guns. Talk to me about that, because that seems unusual to me.
I shoot a lot of target shooting, shoot competitively, shoot for sports, for hunting.
Mm-hmm.
Each one requires a different firearm.
Right, how many guns do you have?
9.
For what?
Hunting, home defense, and just for fun.
Bob, what do you think about people who think that the issue is too many guns? Too many people with too many guns?
The amount of guns I don't think is a problem. I think if you are using them for what they're intended for, there's no problem. I think it's that people don't care anymore.
Let's talk about.
All right. So, what do you guys think about that?
Can we pause that?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I actually had a little bit of a look into this the other day, and I kept seeing a graph appear, like in all the statistics that I looked up, and it was quite an interesting one. I think I shared a picture of it to you before.
Let me find it. I think I've got it right here.
Yep.
Okay, let me just. I'm going to screen share this picture. Actually, I'm going to stop this one. All right.
Hey, Rebecca. Hey, Sarah. Oh, Yusra's sister.
Sarah,
Cool.
yeah.
Yusra's
Cool.
Hello.
Hey there. Okay, so this is the graph. You guys can see it?
Yeah, as you can see, there's a lot of dots here, but one stands alone. and it stands really, really far apart from everyone else.
And so this is the relation between guns and mass shooters.
And I don't think
way
like
more
any one
guns.
stat's going to be a conclusive thing or anything, but the fact that there's this mass difference here, and I feel that sometimes like there's things what we call crimes of opportunity or something like that, where it sort of happens because it's easy to happen, and it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't so easy to happen. So therefore, if you have guns lying around unlocked up or not locked up properly, and then people can access it, they may have done something that they wouldn't have done if they didn't have had the access to that so easily.
Sure. So I think we have to like specify what we mean by gun control and
Yeah,
the United States, right? Because right now
Yes.
it's kind of nebulous.
Yeah.
I don't think the question is whether there should be any kind of regulation. Hey, Rebecca, and hello, Sarah. I'm just checking the chat now. I think the question, because the very possession of a gun and the distribution of guns seems in and of itself a kind of regulation.
Yeah.
The very enforcement of law enabling possession of said guns seems regulatory in nature. So I'm not sure if the question is whether there should be gun control.
Indeed. I mean, can you own a bazooka?
Right.
No, there is some sort of gun control rule there in place that everyone's just agreed that's common sense and makes sense.
Well, what I mean, all right, so maybe I didn't articulate very well what I meant. I'm trying to say that what we mean by control doesn't seem well articulated here.
No.
Without
true.
further go ahead.
Like a lot of people, when I talk about it or say I'm an Australian or whatever and talk about it, they automatically assume that I'm going to want to take away everyone's guns and things like that. But I don't think that's the approach that America should be taking. And so I think it is very important to define gun control to let them know that it's not like you can't have any guns. It's like, we do have a problem here. How can we address it? And as I said before, we're not allowed to own bazookas. That's obviously some form of control. How about we extend that a little bit to make sure that we can try and keep society safe a bit? You know?
So here's what I mean by laws and how they relate to like gun control. Okay. I mean that if you reduce any law to like a system of symbolic logic, that system will always have within it, you know, according to Gödel's two incompleteness theorems, because it's a discrete system of language, it'll have at least one boundary proposition that will be neither provable nor disprovable in the system. So what I'm trying to say is for any law, there will be at least one contingency associated with the law that, you know, we can already expect at a fundamental level we can't address with the law. And so I would conjecture that for any law, you know, you could probably strengthen that by conjecturing that there would be more contingent boundary conditions associated with that law than conditions that the law directly regulates.
Yeah, and that's kind of ties into what I'm saying. I think with like in Australia, we have a different culture, and so because of that, that's changed what we can do with our law a bit. Like because of all these other different factors, it's got to be a multi-pronged approach, is where I'm coming from, sort of things for the American solution, in my opinion.
Sure, but what I mean by that is I don't think you can solve a problem by legislature because of that.
That's what I mean. It's got to be something to do with the culture and things like that. There's a whole lot of things that are underlying.
In other words, the question is not whether we can solve the problem with laws, but rather the question, I think, therefore, because there could always be exceptions, you know, exceptional cases, boundary conditions that the laws do not directly address. So the question, therefore, is not whether laws can inherently solve all problems, nor is that perhaps a rational position to begin with, but rather, given the current laws that exist, is the marginal benefit of their existence greater than or equal to the costs, if any? And would revising these laws or making additional laws add a marginal benefit greater than or in excess of the, you know, greater than or equal to the cost? I think that really is the question.
Yeah, fair enough.
And perhaps not, I don't know for sure. I think I am for reasonable gun laws, but what's reasonable at this point?
Yes, that's definitely up for debate.
As the guy was saying in the video, I think he was getting at that it's a society problem, not just a gun problem, law problem. And
How does
I
gun
guess that's
control
what you
differ
were
in
saying, I
Australia?
think.
Duncan, there's a question for you from Sarah.
Okay. Hello, Sarah. Gun control differs very dramatically in Australia because, as we're sort of alluding to here, we don't have the gun culture that is very prevalent in America. So when the shooting at Port Arthur happened, and they said, "We're all right. We're just going to take all the guns off you." I mean, they didn't take all the guns off us, but they had the big buyback, and the Australians weren't up in arms about it. They were actually just like, "Yeah, fair enough.
So
we
here's-
did bad. We can't have these." And we still have guns over here, but we haven't for those, like as you say, the boundary conditions where like farmers need them to shoot rabbits to make sure that their crops don't get completely devastated. And we understand and we have that as a thing that we can do. Yeah.
It's a good
So, yeah.
question. But it's also potentially illuminating because if you consider it, looking at this graph, is it the number of guns or is it the culture? In other words, does the number of guns the United States has, is that a result of the culture surrounding guns?
I think I think it feeds onto itself because you guys have the NRA who, oh, sorry, I just started looking at the question at the same time.
Another
I'll get to
question
that
for Duncan. Yeah.
But yeah, with the NRA, they sort of perpetuated the whole gun culture and gun things at the same time. So, like in Australia, we don't have a lobby like the NRA that's that powerful, that's making our politicians bend to its will. And so that's quite important too. Okay, notice an uptick in gun purchases in Australia with... No, because as I said before, it's not... so I'll say the question out loud. Duncan, have you noticed an uptick in gun purchase in Australia with the current pandemic conditions as they have in the US? No, but people have been buying toilet paper at an unusual rate. That seems to be Australia's concern for some reason. I don't know. But no, because it's not in our culture to think of guns as a solution to this problem because you can't shoot it.
So here's what I want to kind of unpack, because really when we talk about regulation, we're asking whether additional or current regulations have a marginal benefit greater than or equal to the cost insofar as they minimize harm and maximize utility, right? So here's my question. Let's look at, say, driver's license. We've got
an excellent analogy.
We've got a lot of people with driver's license, right? And the tests actually require you to study a great deal. Hey, Junius.
Yes. Yes.
Unforgivable. But one of the most common, rates at which people get injured in the United States seems to be associated with automobile accidents, right? So does that mean, I guess here's my question. Should we make it harder for people to get licenses?
Yes, well, this is one of the things that I was going to bring up later on, but obviously we're sort of touching on it now, is that in Japan, they have a very, like, you're allowed to have guns in Japan, handguns and everything, but you've got to, like, take a test every, 2 years or something, like a driver's test, and there's way more sort of stringent conditions to being a gun owner, and they don't have any problem with the shooting sort of things happening. Now, again, whether that's entirely a culture thing or whether that's part due to the gun control laws that they have, I feel that gun control laws help, but I also think that the culture is a big part of that too.
I want to make clear that we're not saying that the analogy of a gun and a car are equal, are necessarily equal, but we're honing in on one of the variables associated with, and that variable being, the regulatory parameter, right? That we have so many regulations associated with driving, and yet we seem to have a prevalence of people who still get into accidents. And so
it's more than one thing there. It should.
Yeah, but Sarah asks a question that it's an interesting question, but to be honest, I don't know if any one of us is, or even any singular mathematician that I'm aware of, is sufficiently competent to answer this question, because there's so many variables, as is with this topic, it's a multivariate topic. What are
Yes.
your predictions for the state of gun affairs regulation given this pandemic? I mean, in which country, for which people, maybe, right? I mean,
we are Americans. They're talking about the USA, so I imagine she's talking about that. But over here in Australia, it's not going to change anything.
It's
And I think one of the differences here is that whilst we do have it over here, it's not like we've taken steps. And for example, if I go outside and I breach the COVID regulations, then I will actually get an $11,000 fine. Like we're fucking taking it serious. Ooh, we're taking it seriously over here. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll try to give a crack at some conjectures, and I'll get to your question. There's another question after that. I don't think culture has a lot to do with it. We'll see about that. But as far as predictions pertaining to gun regulations, I mean, I think the first thing you probably do is partition it into a class of populations based on density and whether it's urban or suburban, because that's usually how you classify and predict behaviors actually rather well in mathematical modeling. You can predict people's behaviors, counterintuitive though it may seem initially, geographically, precisely in relation to whether they live in urban or suburban environments. You find that in suburban environments, there's usually a greater concentration of people with certain sets of political views. That doesn't mean they will. It just means the probability is often greater. So, to answer your question, Sarah, we'd probably have to refine the question to particular geographies within the, geographic isolations within the United States.
That's
and then
true too.
Then we'd parameterize we'd have to control for population density within these geographical regions. We then try to find statistical correlations between particular political beliefs and these population densities. And from there, we could maybe have very vague trajectories, but yeah, I think that's a very difficult question for me to answer right now.
Yes. Yeah. And it's understandable because you're not wrong about different parts of America being very different in their types of attitudes towards all different types of things.
Yeah.
It's sort of well known for that.
So culture, I think, and the reason I suspect culture may be a factor is because you have to ask why we have so many guns in the first place. And if you look at an economic model, it implies that there was a demand and supply curve that met at a market equilibrium, whether the market was governmentally instantiated or just a black market of sorts, right?
Yeah.
Because the markets would predict, in the case of Australia, that the demand and supply curves are different, right? So in other words, if you look at this curve, to me, this graph right here, one of the implications is that this implies a supply and demand equilibrium far in excess of those of other nations. So it's not. In other words, I think the conjecture that culture is a factor. Let's refine the term culture to something a little bit more precise. Let us say the supply and demand are such that there's a different equilibrium.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what I meant at the start when I was saying that what works in Australia won't work wholesale. If we grab everything that we did over here and then put it over there, it wouldn't pan out so easily. There'd be riots.
And it's all right, Junius. I think it's great that you don't have a precise answer because I don't think either of us would claim that.
Yeah.
The purpose of this question is really just to begin motivating questions on the topic. If I really wanted to, with any level of rigor, answer any particular question, I would have to think for probably weeks and do a lot of precise mathematical calculations. And even then I would consider most of it conjecture, because the trajectories are highly sensitive to initial conditions for any system of differential equations.
Yep. And also, as an added bonus, as I mentioned the NRA before, I'll bring it up again because reasons. They've made it so that they've obscured any data relating to gun violence. It's that you don't have the database that you really need because it's sort of been hidden a bit. Unless you can access that.
Some of it is out there.
They have put a muffler on it, is what I mean. It's an actual thing that's happened.
Yeah.
They've cut funding for studies and stuff like that. The data isn't there.
You guys want to start watching the video again?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about
Fine. That's all right. We got a little bit sidetracked. That's all right. That happens. That's why we do it live. We're looking for something that's not so much published after the fact, because we want a bit of structure, but we also want to keep the conversation open, for people to ask questions and make potentially substantive points. And if you add too much structure, I've found that sometimes it can detract from that. It's a difficult thing to balance. We'll get better at it with time.
Yes. The whole
okay,
structure versus organic thing is a very, very interesting balance to do.
Okay, let's get back to the video.
Red flag laws. Who thinks that they're a good idea?
I do, to a point.
Okay, talk to me about that.
It really comes down to the person who's going to be calling you in, saying, hey, this person's talking about robbing something or doing a mass shooting or committing harm to him or herself. I can see a point the law enforcement stepping in.
Do you think that if well executed, these red flag laws, would that be something you would support?
If you had red flag laws, if the individual is calling wolf, as long as there's some pretty severe consequences for somebody that goes through that motion, and then whatever the legal expense.
Yes.
I like this, right? This is a very good point to make. Like, I like the red flag laws. I think that's a good idea, so we can keep tabs on people because if you can prevent it before it happens, then you save lives.
Well, but you can't.
Like
you can't legally, at least in our current system of legislature, as far as I'm aware, you can't charge someone with the potential to commit a crime.
No, but I'm not saying charge them, but it just means like keep an eye on, in my opinion. So my understanding of the red flag laws isn't complete. I don't know exactly what they're the finer details, but to me, I would have when things happened, I'd put like a little asterisk, like a little red flag, and say, well, that's one little sign and another little sign, and then if you get 3 of those signs, then not saying arrest the person, but then maybe have
I don't think it's a good idea. I think it seemed like a good idea, but if our understanding of modern economics in the mathematical models pertaining to them are correct, I think there are counterintuitive ways to better track and predict people's behavior than having a government system to regulate them. So let me kind of unpack what I'm saying here. If people respond, go ahead.
Yep. I was just going to say, the thing that I was saying was a good idea was the fact that he wanted to have a provision in it for people who cried wolf, so that people couldn't just, you abuse that law, that red flag law.
Yeah. The only problem let me just get to what I'm trying to say, because I think it should be clear what I'm trying to say afterwards. You could have a law telling people do not do this, right?
Yeah.
Or you could cleverly think of a way to economically incentivize people not to do it. Which do you think people will actually respond more to?
Definitely the second one.
Probably. If people respond to economic incentives consciously or unconsciously, right?
Mm-hmm.
People, they tend to. So here's an example. Democrats passed, and by Democrats I mean, that's very nebulous. I mean, those people who did passed a law pertaining to single motherhood. I don't know if you guys are familiar. Wes, you probably have heard this before.
Yeah.
That incentivized economically people to have single mother households due to the economic benefits.
Okay.
And lo and behold, in the United States, the rate of single motherhood has actually risen substantially.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So it was an unintended consequence, because the idea was to help people in those situations, right? But it became economically incentivized.
Yes, in Australia we did a similar thing with a thing called a baby bonus at one point.
Yeah.
So if you had a baby, you got a few $1,000s extra, and there was a few people out there who had a baby because of that few $1,000s extra. It's shocking and horrible.
Right.
I think there may have been more variables with that, though, with the young women.
Right. But in the corollary studies, the strongest predictor was the economic incentive, because that's literally that's where it began. And I think the rate almost increased, if I'm not mistaken, by a factor of 5.
Why did they do it, though?
I think the desire was the intent. I don't know their exact intentions.
Was it only monetary, or could have been that it empowered them more to get rid of?
Yeah, that's a good point. That is a very good point. Whether
No, I don't think that's correct at all, because that's not what the statistics show. Actually, these people still cling to higher rates of poverty as a result. The government aid is not sufficient for a two-person household to be overcome by a single income.
Yeah.
It doesn't follow.
Yeah. Still an interesting point to make there.
Yeah, it's possible, but at least in terms of the arithmetic of the economics, that doesn't. It's not impossible.
I've heard about it. I don't know the stats, so.
Right. Well,
I'll give way to it.
But what I'm saying is, I think that rather than trying to regulate people's behaviors with laws, we want laws that have implicit economic incentives.
Yeah.
That are carefully chosen.
Yeah. Because as I was saying before about how
always do economic though, but there is a lot of truth in what you're saying as far as giving them giving them motivation. Whether it's economic or whatever kind of motivation you give.
I mean, look at toilet paper today, right?
Fair.
I mean,
fair. That's motivation.
I can't find any toilet paper anyway.
Right. I mean,
toilet paper. We're out there.
Yeah.
So in other words, I think what we have to do is study the market dynamics associated with guns, figure out what the demand and supply curve are doing, and try to make laws that accommodate them and can make predictive shifts that are better aimed at the policies we want. I don't think just ignoring the multivariable analysis and just like saying, writing laws, because the problem is if you make something illegal, it actually can incentivize profit in areas you may not want. For example, like, with prison having a potential for profit with the firms that advertise to certain prisons with certain technologies, right?
Yeah.
So it's not clear whether or not the amount of people in prison actually induce a deadweight loss on economic productivity if and when they go to prison. I would conjecture they do, and that's so whenever you prevent your citizens from contributing to an economy by sending them to jail, you would like to have more efficient ways that don't disrupt the fluidity of your economy, but also preserve moral facets desired, right?
Yes.
And sometimes legislature, it seems a direct path to doing that, but it's often less efficient because it imposes deadweight loss on an economy, and it sometimes fails to do, often because of boundary conditions and the difficulty in implementing laws, which isn't to say I'm against laws. It's just that, as I said, I think the marginal benefit of their implementation should be greater than equal to the cost, and it's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So I think that these variables should be considered, in the case of gun laws as well.
And everything for that person to get his rights back are paid by that person. I could accept that to some level.
It's kind of scary. Like, somebody that has mental illness and they have a gun, and what are they capable of? So I think I could get behind it.
Talk to me about how you thought about it.
So what do you guys think about the claim about mental illness? Is it a mental illness problem?
Because I've heard it is as much as I've heard Duncan say it was a big part of it.
Well, it's part of it, yeah.
And it may be part of it, but I don't think everybody that goes and shoots somebody is mentally ill. And I don't think everybody mentally ill is going to go shoot somebody.
I think there's a distinction between is mental illness a problem and is it a mental illness problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of those.
One of them sounds very accusatory. It sounds very hard. Thank you. I forgot that word for a second.
Well, I was going to say, one of them also implies something about the statistics underlying the phenomenon. That is to say, one of them implies that most of the occurrences are correlated with mental illness, whereas the other does not.
I'm not sure what the stats show, but I suspect it's not just a problem of mental illness. It's a problem of society. It may be a factor, but it's like they were talking about red flags.
Yeah.
And stuff. I would be more for something like that, which is the NSA, CIA, and FBI's job, I think, not just anybody.
Can I just clarify something as well?
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
I don't think, I'm bipolar, okay?
Mhm.
I don't think mental health worries should be exclusive to people who are bipolar. What I'm getting at is that it can be a mental health problem even if the person doesn't actually suffer from a mental illness per se. The
Right.
ability to be able to go and actually talk to a psychiatrist and actually help get him to help me deal with my issues and stuff like that has been absolutely wonderful for me, and a great side effect from me being diagnosed with bipolar that's allowed me to be able to have some interesting conversations with the psychiatrist and talk about some things and get some things out there. If people had access to this kind of stuff, then, like as I said, you don't have to be bipolar to have a bad day or to have a bad thought going through your head and to spin your wheels on it and to actually end up executing on a bad idea. It doesn't. You don't actually have to be bona fide mental ill, but it could just be that it's still a mental health problem. Does that make sense to everyone here?
Yeah.
Depending on how you
There's-
define mental health, I think another
Yeah.
problem is
That's
it's
exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There
You know-
is a big stigma here, and also if we made guns where nobody with any kind of mental illness whatsoever could have a gun,
I think
you
this
would
is
have a lot of people not going. I know someone
Exactly right. That's a
personally
dangerous
that would
law
not
because it would
go.
mean people won't get diagnosed.
Won't get
Yeah, I agree.
diagnosed because they
well because
shoot.
think about it from when we say economic incentivization, we're not just talking money. That's a common misconception
Yeah.
amongst people. We're
Yep.
really talking about a game theoretic model that disincentivizes or incentivizes particular behaviors depending on the input of desired motives or outcomes.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
so if you assume a body of individuals that are rationally self-interest and capable of at least synthesizing to some extent the data that they have, access to, and you assign a particular sets of motives, then of course the claim of it's a foundation. There are many foundational problems with the game theoretic models, like is the information perfect, is the person lucid, etc. But
Yeah.
if you then assume particular impediments that a person is cognizant of, you can predict behavioral variations accordingly. But I think this is an interesting point. Most people who commit murder have some sort of history of childhood trauma, so all could be said to have some sort of mental health issues. I mean, that's fair, but
Yeah.
again, I feel like it's too specific for as broad a topic as gun control, because I think the problem is the terminology is so nebulous and generalized that it's difficult to concretize to specific instances. In reality, this would be, like I said, it would be something you have to partition into subsets of cases in different dimensions, and in which you would ask the question. It's kind of like, consider a shovel. Should we be digging near gas lines? I don't think so. I don't know if you guys understand why that would be dangerous. I hope so.
Yes. My dad used to trench for a
Right.
gas company or whatever, or plumbing company.
Right. So it's like, even if you remove the variable of gun and just replace it with some tool, you can turn something as innocuous as a shovel into a fucking dangerous weapon. If you start digging around gas lines, like you dig around a school and it's
And you don't even have
pressurized
to be-
gas.
And you don't even have to be trying to use it as a weapon. You can just be trying to use it as a shovel, and it can end up being a bit of a weapon because you just blew yourself up a bit.
So it's of course, I think that the analogies are not quite comparable in that in the case of a shovel, you don't require necessarily malicious intent as a motive to go around shooting people, right? But that's also not the sum total of all cases in which gun incidents, and injuries occur.
You also said something about a subset of mental patients or something. What about how do you make a law against a bunch of mentally ill people?
Right.
You're going back to the red flagging like they were doing in the video.
Well, how do you know that they'll actually follow the law?
You don't know they'll follow the law. You don't know. They could not tell about their illness, for one, or they could. That's why I'm so off. Okay. Anyway, I was just going to say that I don't know how you'd ever enforce anything like that and decide who is at high risk of doing something and who isn't.
Here's potentially what's problematic with the logic here. if you're saying we need laws because these sets of people do not obey our laws or are fringe cases to the current law,
that won't work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Not gonna work.
You know, there's potentially a problem with the logic there. You know,
Yeah. Very much so.
we need laws for criminals.
Yeah.
In fact, if you think about it systemically, like this is kind of an irony, is our society actually, the laws don't just exist for criminals. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, as you
They
said
may-
before, they almost don't exist for criminals in a way because, like,
It's not
yeah,
clear,
If
right?
we can
It's not.
punish them.
yeah,
I mean, it defines. They really define legally what our government is permitted to do, right?
yeah,
And but I guess it's difficult to determine whether or not laws are things that are for criminals or not, considering that a criminal, at least by definition, seems not to adhere to them. So
If you go either way, though, if they're law abiding, they probably don't need the law.
yeah,
It gives us the reason to punish them.
well,
so
let's
it's kind of confusing.
well, let's
That's all I'm saying.
let's rephrase it to if they already adhere to the set of behaviors that we desire, that the law would try to proliferate. Why are we making the law, right?
Yeah.
And so it's back to the question of the marginal
Yeah.
benefit in proportion to the cost.
Yeah.
And insofar as gun laws are concerned, if there are more guns than people, then, which I think per capita now in the United States, isn't that the claim that there are per capita more guns than there are people? I've not looked at like the
I
statistics
think we
behind
have
that
like
claim.
2 or 3 guns per person or something.
But if you
like that. I'm
think
not sure.
about
I don't know exactly,
but if you think about that, the nature of the distribution is such that it's not proportional to say every person has a gun.
no, there are
No.
people without guns, and there are people with
Right.
100.
Right.
Yeah.
It's probably more of a Pareto distribution, that those that have the most are the fewest in number. And so the mean is skewed in such a manner that it's difficult to make a very concise extrapolation from that, but I think that one could also say, well, it's quite remarkable that despite the overabundance of guns at our disposal, we don't have more incidents then.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, like, that's a lot of guns.
Yeah.
It's not true that most people possess them, though, right?
What I think would be more beneficial is just getting than the gun laws. I think would be just safety issues.
Yep.
Getting more people to get trained to carry.
I mean, it's
like my dad went through a bunch of training to be able to conceal carry, and he learned a lot about things. It calmed him, trained him how to use a gun like a police officer would.
Okay, we got someone coming
that's
aboard.
good.
All right. Well, into the chat.
I think it's Alan. Welcome aboard, sir. We're
Yeah.
happy to have you on.
All right. Oh,
But I think
I
that
was
would be
just-
more productive is gun safety, and also getting people to not be so careless with guns, letting their kids have access to their guns. For one, it's
yes,
different.
that's
That's
definitely
a
a good
different
thing.
age. Before,
Mhm.
when I was younger, it wasn't as bad, but I still had a friend that was shot in the head
Welcome aboard, sir.
at 14.
Howdy, Ali. Nice
Hi.
to meet.
Welcome back, Alan.
Hello,
see you again.
welcome.
I see the quarantine is going well.
Oh, yes, well, I mean, there's not much to do anyway, so it's not like it's interrupting my plans, but yeah.
All right, take care.
I know how you feel that they gave me the quarantine order to me, and I was sitting on the couch. I was like,
It's like, it's like this changes nothing.
One of the difficulties with the topic of gun control is kind of like, as we said earlier, it's too general and nebulous, right? Because obviously the sets of ways in which we would like refine what we mean and how it should be applied would fundamentally alter our very approach, right? So it's kind of like what I said with the shovel, where the tool itself seems innocuous in some instances, but if you start digging around gas lines, suddenly we have to start thinking about whether or not we want to incentivize that kind of behavior.
Yeah, it could be trouble. All of a sudden, you can do more damage with a shovel than a handgun.
If you're not careful, I mean, it depends.
Hey, Christopher.
That's
Small technical thing, but has anybody informed you that your camera is like flickering occasionally?
No.
No?
Well, I think you just did. So yes.
Okay.
Thank you for doing that.
I think you answered your question.
All right.
But yeah,
Bouncing around a little bit.
it's probably because my
Yeah.
my Wi-Fi is like, the bandwidth is really being like pushed to the limits because most people are using the Wi-Fi in the apartment I live in.
Yeah, that's happened with
Right.
like Disney Plus and Netflix and everything as well. Everyone's
yeah.
like, "Hey, let's sit on the couch and watch TV."
No, Disney picked the right fucking time to launch Disney Plus. Because all of a sudden, like I'm halfway curious if like the pandemic wasn't engineered by Disney, and they're like, we'll get everybody to stay inside and watch TV.
I was
Yeah.
gonna say Disney Corporation is not the evil, but I don't know how I feel about the surety of that statement.
So, do we have anybody in chat that's like for gun possession and is against a specific policy?
Yeah,
Like, in other words, I'm looking for specifics because I've noticed that the topic is pretty nebulous, and it
Yeah.
shouldn't be tackled as an all or a 0-0.
Yeah,
Yes,
well,
that's right.
my thought on it is there are some instances where having a gun is not just all right, but actually really a necessity. And the main ones that come to mind are when you're kind of out in the wilderness in mountainous regions in California or anywhere where attacks by wildlife are a lot more common than they are in like urban environments. I can't recall if it's Iceland or Greenland or where, but there is like at least one town somewhere in the Arctic where polar bears are such a common thing that it is illegal to leave the town without a gun, which is, I mean, an interesting thing when we're over here debating like trying to throw out all guns. But I really feel like the ideal that we try to strive for is a world without the need of guns, without this argument that like we all need guns to protect ourselves and our possessions. But in America, a lot of people seem to take the opposite stance, where it's like, no, we have guns because it's a protected right for whatever reason.
This isn't what the Second Amendment really says.
Probably
but-
a very old, antiquated law.
Yeah, but
besides the point,
it's like people will argue for the possession of guns for no greater reason than it's an American tradition.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like that's a very valid argument. It's like if you're going to have
it's the argument from tradition. So good.
if
arguing it just because it's a law as the Second Amendment, which is actually talking about a militia and having the power to overcome our government, is why it was put
And it
in
was
there.
written. And it was
So
written
the issue
in the day
shouldn't be
before
whether it's
people could
legal
go.
for us. It should be whether we need it or not. By hunting,
And it-
I agree we do, but by many other
And that
reasons
Constitution.
are bad reasons. So they really need separated why we should and why we shouldn't have them. And probably our Constitution needs ratified. But sorry, go ahead. I'm done.
That's all right.
Talking out
I've got a bit of lag. I got a bit of lag, and I'm trying to like.
yeah, it's
that
like you're
Constitution-
talking into the pauses, and then I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I fucked you up again.
Yeah.
Well, I'll let Duncan talk.
Law
And he's
and
positive.
it is in the
Yeah, okay,
Constitution, but it was written a long time ago, and as you said, it was for a well-regulated militia, right? So, like, I'm not saying that it shouldn't be in there, and you shouldn't have a right to bear arms. But it's like this was written before you could go to the shop down the road and buy yourself an AR-15 for like that sort of
See,
thing
but-
or whatever. We need to make it so that we're a little bit more like modernize it. You know what I mean? Make it so maybe you know.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
well defined. I think that's the problem with the law.
Yeah.
What do you mean by arms?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. They say for a
It's,
well-armed
it's
militia.
not. It's not well defined.
Yeah.
What is an
Yep, yep.
armament?
Can I have my potato gun?
Gun ownership is enshrined in the U.S. by the Bill of Rights Constitution. That's right. My main concern is the way guns are used and what limitations should be imposed on the extent it affects greater society. So I think that's a legitimate concern, Sarah. But as I think I've hopefully pointed out, for any law you make, there will exist at least one boundary condition that the law cannot address. So you can't solve a problem with a law. And that's why it's not a question of whether we can solve our problems necessarily with laws, but rather whether or not the marginal benefit of the law and its execution is greater than or equal to the cost. I think that's what this comes down to. And so it really reduces to a case-by-case marginal analysis that's carefully carried out. And I'm not sure that the question, which is not what you've said, I want to make clear, I'm not saying you said what I'm negating as much as just responding and adding clarification to those who in the discussion who haven't followed throughout. And I think the question is one of issue because it's potentially nebulous and often, like as I said, what is meant by armament in the Second Amendment is not clear to me.
Well, as I said, it can't mean what we have today because they didn't have that back then.
Okay, so Brad's for gun possession. Brad, do you want to join in the conversation? Is it actually like someone who's like for gun possession?
I'm for it, just reasonable.
I'm going to drop a link.
And I don't know
Brad, if you want to, if the law is to be involved, it should address issues that cause. I'd like to talk to you about what you think, Brad, because I'd like to get some diverse positions in here. So why don't you just click this link?
Come on in.
Yeah, come on in. Just that way we can actually ask you what you think. You know, because that's what we're all about here, I think.
And we can respond in real time and stuff. It's actually
just
really
click
helpful.
that link, and you should be able to be queued right up into the conversation.
Yep.
Let's see if he'll come on camera.
If he's camera shy, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone.
You can always pause your video and just come in with audio too.
Yeah, you don't even need to have audio, like video on. You can just come in and we can hear audio.
Yep.
Or I mean, if you want to keep commenting in the chat, either whatever works.
Yeah,
That's true
it's just
too. That's the way that
usually
you do things, do it that way. But up to you.
Is anyone anti-gun?
Again, not me.
I mean, it's difficult to say because I feel like that is by anti-gun. Do we mean for every possible situation I am against the possession of a gun? That just seems
not that.
I only needed a single counterexample to that claim, right? But if you mean for this situation, I'm not for the possession of a gun, maybe, right? So it's like that's the problem. It's like we need specifics here. It's like saying if I say I'm pro guns, like that doesn't mean I'm pro a gun up my rectum, right? Like
or pro bazookas.
Right.
There's a limit. There's a upper limit.
I would get involved in the video if I was alone.
All right, fair enough.
Okay, so you can hang in the background.
Sarah says
you're just hanging in the background, okay?
Just watching comments.
Brad, how many people would you like to? So with whom would you like to discuss? Just one-on-one? Do you just want to talk with me?
I think he may mean he's not
just
alone.
him.
That he can't get online. I think is what he's saying.
Oh, so in other words, it's
he's
so in other words,
can't
people. I got you.
Right now.
I like how you immediately threw out my video. It's like, Alan, you're not important. No one
It
wants
wasn't
to.
an accident. It
Just
wasn't an accident. And you can guess who would have gone next in line, right?
Me.
Yeah. It would be a disturbance to others. So I mean, I find that an interesting statement from a person who's pro the possession of guns. You know.
I think he's talking about if he were to start talking in the video on the chat, that would disturb the people around. Okay.
Lines, yep.
No, I get that. I just mean I'm being facetious when I say that.
That's quite unusual for you. You kind of caught us off guard.
Because usually
my job.
Yeah.
You're not going to make me write on a whiteboard now, are you? That's definitely your job.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but
anti-gun would be absurd. Okay, that's what.
Yeah,
because
right, because it's like if you define it over all possible situations, that's just you'll need a single counterexample. That's going to be a very difficult claim to defend. And conversely, it seems rather weak if you go situation by situation for which you wouldn't need one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let us say there exists at least one instance in which possession of a gun would seem optimal. And by optimal, we mean the marginal benefit of possession is greater than or equal to the cost. And there's also at least one situation in which possession of a gun may have marginal costs in excess of the benefit, right? And so which you wouldn't benefit. Those are both tenable.
Yes,
so,
right.
so the discussion should be broadened, I think. But also, go ahead.
There's times I've not wanted to have a gun on me.
Yes, exactly right. Remember I was saying before about opportunity sort of things? Like as someone who's bipolar, we sometimes have down moments sometimes. And the ability to be able to pick up a gun and solve things with it before I could fully think it through is a little bit dangerous. Like, I personally don't know whether I'd have a gun, but if I lived in America, I would change that attitude possibly because of the saturation of guns that you guys have over there. It's kind of like, well, everyone else has one, so I probably should have one as well, kind of mindset that might enter my mind.
Well,
you know what I mean?
one thing that did occur to me, just
I don't want to be the one person that doesn't have a gun.
So I'd like to look at the supply and demand economics, perhaps like over the break, and we can perhaps like revisit the topic because I've been really busy this week, so I haven't had like time to do much of the research I usually do. But I'm interested in like whether the sheer preponderance of firearms actually results in significant diminishing returns to where the additional. So here's my question: if you look at the marginal benefit of the first gun you have, right, versus the cost. When you start throwing in additional guns, do you start getting diminishing returns with every additional gun to where eventually it doesn't make sense?
Go ahead,
Yes,
Duncan.
I believe that can be the case because remember that graph that we're showing before? I think it sort of suggests a bit like that because like if you've got one gun, it's fairly easy to track, right?
Yeah.
If you've got 20 guns in your house, it's going to be fairly easy for a kid to be able to sneak one away generally, unless you have them on lockdown. And I like the idea of having them, if you've got those guns and you want to put them on lockdown, fine. But just, they are a deadly weapon. You've got to treat them as such. I know a lot of Americans
I thought you meant having kids on lockdown for a minute.
Well, actually, now that you mentioned it, that's not a bad idea.
Well, one of the interesting points that I always come into is why do these people have guns? What is their reason, their motivation for getting a gun in the first place? Because most of them do not live out in the wilderness. They're not encountering wild animals. They'll give a few primary reasons, either for self-defense, like carry it around an urban environment in case you're getting like robbed or something, or because they like gun sports. They like just the act of shooting guns, hunting, marksmanship. They're basically a gun collector. And what's interesting is that the vast majority of Americans do not own guns. It's really only like the rural people and then a select few people who are gun collectors who own the majority of all of the publicly owned firearms in America.
Do you guys know any like avid gun collectors that would like we could bring on and talk with? Because I'd like to get specific into certain policies and like specific like because the problem with the topic is, like I said, you can't really address it as like the way that most people address the topic, right? No guns, or we need more regulation. Like that's so vague. What is the policy? What is it being applied to? What are the benefits? What are the costs? And would the mathematics work out to where it's even tenable, right? I feel like the way that most people discuss these topics is not productive or informative.
Yeah, I think.
Go ahead.
I think maybe if we set goals for what we'd like to see from whatever gun policy we'd adopt, because personally, I would like to see fewer people having the access or the ability to carry a gun, and especially concealed weapons, handguns. That's the firearm that's responsible for the most violent crime where firearms are concerned. Less people walking around with that, like in urban environments. Other people might go the exact opposite route and say that we should have more, but we should outline very specific goals for whatever policy we're trying to adopt instead of saying more regulation. It's like, well, you can have regulation out the ass. It doesn't mean you're going to get what you want.
So here's another question I have. A lot of people seem to be concerned with, given the preponderance of guns and the ease with which they can cause death if and when used properly, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people claim that if we had, or let me say there exists a subset of the population that would argue that if we had fewer guns, it would be harder for people to kill each other as easily.
I agree with that to an
but there's
extent.
also a subsection of the population that agrees, that says that if we all had guns, there'd be fewer people killing people too. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure
There's,
who's
you know,
right. I'm
armed
just saying
teachers
there's two
and
sides to
things
that.
too. So
I mean, there's
Yeah,
a very
exactly right, yeah.
nebulous. There's a very nebulous metric that people who are staunchly pro gun rights will throw out, like that they try to assign values to the number of lives saved by guns, but that's
yeah.
it's
How do you do that?
It's not really realistic to
That's proving a
calculate that.
negative.
It's like
Yeah.
you can say any number that
Yeah.
every life in America has been saved by guns. And just
Or you hear,
I mean, if
Yeah,
you're gonna
fully.
include wars, right? Wars fought with firearms, then it's like,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. In World War II, you know, the world got saved by guns, kind of. One gun in particular in a bunker somewhere.
the only thing that'll save a man with a gun is a man with another gun, or a man bad guy
Well-
with a gun will.
So
be
here's my
a good
question.
guy with a gun.
Let's-
Yeah,
a good
that's
guy
very
with
much
a
a
gun.
logic.
Let's consider the
As
set of
well.
cases here. Suppose, Wes, that because the perpetrator usually is the one who has the element of surprise. Like you're not usually some Zen monk who has like, you know, or some agile ninja who's like, I know exactly when you're going to draw me, motherfucker, and
Yeah.
I already see
So
what's
they're gonna
coming.
get a drop
You
on
know?
you.
Yeah.
If you don't have the
They're
power
always
of
gonna drop on
foresight, then usually
Yep.
they have the element of surprise, right? So suppose Wes draws his gun at me.
If they don't get a drop on you, you might be the problem.
Well,
Uh-huh.
suppose that I have a gun, and let's just be charitable and say I am well trained, right?
Yeah.
Is Wes well trained or not? Is the first question, right? But moreover,
Yeah.
independent of his training, what is the proximity? Because if he's within 5 feet and I then reach for my gun, I think that's the stupidest thing I can then do.
Yeah.
Right?
I'm
Because
fine
then
Yeah,
with
you're going to get shot. Like, yeah, he's got a gun in his hand. Yep, he's going to prevent you from being able to equalize. Yep, you
Well,
are
he's-
dead
he's-
to that
he's
movement.
I'm not saying it's
Checkmate.
certain, obviously. I'm not saying it's certain. I'm just saying it
No.
it would be very hard given the
No, but
the
it's a pretty good
nature
chance.
of the dopaminergic center and how our
Yeah.
endocrine system works, you know, and our lymphatic system. That
Usually, if you're getting mugged, they already have their gun out.
so,
So-
but here's my
Yeah.
thing.
They
You're
say
not
Suppose,
going to win
gun.
that draw.
but
So-
suppose that for whatever reason he doesn't, when I reach for my gun, shoot me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we each
Okay,
have a
you
gun
got
pointed at each other, right?
Yeah.
Who has the advantage? I mean, because the reaction
Yeah.
time is such that even if I shoot you, you can still shoot me.
You know,
It's not like in the
movie.
movies where if I shoot you, you know, your finger can't slip or even twitch and still shoot me. It's not like that. You don't just drop dead like in the movies. It takes time.
Well, pretty much the policy from people who actually carry guns is they will not point that gun at somebody unless they are prepared and in a position where they might
They wanna
have to
shoot.
shoot them. It's
Yeah.
like they're not
Mhm.
going to threaten them with that gun. Even when police do it, if police are pointing a gun at you, assuming that they're good police officers and follow acceptable police doctrine, they are
Assuming.
prepared to shoot you. It's like
Yeah.
Yeah.
you have a very limited window to de-escalate
You
that
see what-
before
there's a-
someone's getting
there's
shot.
Here's
a
what I'm pointing-
There's a
Go
cliche
ahead.
that says if you pull a gun, you should be ready to shoot the person, sort of things, because like you've escalated the situation so
Yeah.
high that you have to take it to the final conclusion, which is
As
I
somebody,
understand, but dangerous.
as somebody that, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
As as somebody that's been held at gunpoint before, I will say
Oh
that
shit!
I am glad that I did not have a gun on me, because if he was paranoid, he was
Yeah,
freaking,
yeah.
and if
Yep.
he'd seen a gun on me,
I've
he
been-
would have
I've
possibly
been
shot me.
I've been
He
held
had a
at
loaded gun
gunpoint.
at my.
I've had
He had a
I've
loaded
been held-
shotgun at my head, so I'm glad he didn't see a gun and freak out
Yeah,
more.
yeah. Fully.
He was
Hello,
What
already
are you gonna say,
freaking
Chris?
and
So I've been held at gunpoint by a bunch of police officers because I looked a lot like a suspect they were looking for.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was walking down the street, and
I've had
just my-
guns pointed at me
you know,
too.
I had my
from police.
headphones in, and I wasn't really paying attention. But like within minutes, all of a sudden, there's a cop car there, and there's like 20 officers around me, and they're like, "Get the fuck on the ground." And I'm like, okay, because, you know. And so I just
you make a convincing argument.
right, there's no point, you know, because I knew beyond reasonable doubt that I wasn't the person they were looking for, right? So there was no,
Yeah.
you know, but had I reached for a gun or something, I don't
Jesus.
think that would have been a good
Man.
idea, right? I think they would have
No.
shot me right there. Because
Yeah.
I mean,
the
the-
suspect they were
Yeah.
looking for was armed and dangerous and looked like me, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Oh, geez, they would have shot you
get-
right there.
No, it's
Yeah,
like
yeah, they
they
would've
get
shot
they
you.
get very twitchy.
And they would have had
It's-
every right to.
and it's like if they think
Yeah.
that any quick movement, anything other than putting your hands up and doing whatever they tell you, that
Yeah.
they can interpret that as reaching for a weapon. And yeah, they're within their like the doctrine of police responsibility to open fire for their own safety.
And
Yeah.
open up on you.
Well,
They
see, in Australia, right?
their gun on you at the largest body
See,
spot is what they're trained.
But you
Yeah.
see what I pointed
yeah.
out with this scenario where you assume a person has the draw on you because that's usually what the perpetrator does.
Yeah.
I don't see the advantage in drawing your firearm then, which
No.
is most likely
I
occurring.
see
Yeah.
distinct disadvantage in it. As because
And then even if you draw, I don't see the advantage in both of you then having a firearm aimed at each other.
The only
No.
advantage
especially
point that really comes in
when you
play
say
is if you witness somebody else being robbed or something.
And how likely is that?
And
remember when you
it's
said
not
before
as
about
it happens, but there's not. I'm sorry, Duncan.
And notice we assume
okay,
that
mate.
we assume that people were trained in this, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole other variable. It's
Yeah.
actually very fucking hard to
Yeah.
hit a moving target.
Well, there's
Yes,
and
and-
I'm sorry, Duncan. I'm cutting you off again. I
No, it's all right. I'll give
promise.
you-
That's I will shut up after this, and we will let you talk.
No, it's all right.
But one of the things that's kind of interesting with a lot of basically street thugs, however they come into possession of a firearm, they're not trained. They use it more as like a power piece, but also when they're in the business of committing crimes, they don't want to kill someone. They don't want to actually hurt them because that dramatically increases the risk of the police actually
Getting
coming
involved,
after
right,
them.
right.
Yeah, and all of this stuff happening. It's like for most, but I'm not going to say most of them, but for a lot of them, if you are actually a responsible gun owner and you know how to use a firearm, you probably could draw and shoot them and they wouldn't react because they're not expecting to use that weapon. They just have it to try
I don't know.
and threaten you.
I don't know. Some
the
of
thing is,
them I
they can
think
be
will
nervous.
shoot
He
because
didn't-
they're
he didn't-
scared.
listen,
make
listen.
them do something in their blink of a thing.
Yeah, but he didn't universally quantify the claim. He said for some. So he's just saying
Yeah.
for some
Yeah,
cases.
that's
He's
true.
not,
Yeah.
he's not
Yes,
saying
yes,
for all.
That's true. Yep.
So I think it's
That's
a fair
a good move.
claim. You know, it's
Yeah.
All right, one sec. I've got
That's fair
something to
point.
say.
Yeah.
I've had a few, but this one's kind of cool, right? I was talking to a friend the other day about the police shootings in America, right? And by that I mean police shooting individuals.
I mean,
and
the way
I was
saying it that way sounds like they're like going around shooting people, though. Like,
No, but well, I mean, compared to us, you kind of are.
but you know what I'm saying? Like, it makes it sound like they're like, well, who am I going to shoot today? Like,
But as I said, from Australians' perspective, we see a lot of this. It's like, really? You don't like
Yeah.
yourselves? You know. But the thing is, what I've actually managed to analyze it like a little bit in my head to be, is that in Australia, when a copper pulls someone over, right, the chances of that person having a bloody firearm is so minimal that it hardly even crosses the copper's mind. They will be thinking more about the thing that they're actually pulling the person up for and stuff like that, okay? Because they have that freedom here. But in America, and I'm not blaming them at all, right? There's a much stronger chance that if you pull someone up in a car or something, that they're going to have a gun, right? Just like, that's a thing, because all the guns you guys have and the guns we don't have. So they are in a state of fear already. They go to work with a much less likely chance of returning home than in Australia, where people shootouts and things like that aren't common because, again, not enough guns to. You need at least 2 guns to have a shoot.
Like I said, I think it's really difficult to like tackle this topic in a concrete manner.
Yeah.
Because really what we'd have to do is pull up particular policy proposals, and most people online aren't they're not proposing precise policies, right? They're making nebulous claims, and they're
That's one
referring
of the things
to
I found so hard to do for this research. Yeah. To find people who are making concrete. This is the solution that we want. They just say we should do gun control. It's like, well, what kind of gun control?
right.
Yeah.
Well, it also presupposes that gun control is a possible solution, if at all.
Hmm.
You know, I mean, I don't know. Like, there are many. So look at like food. Okay, I would argue that most people do more harm to themselves over their lifetime through how they eat, right? But should we start to regulate people's diets?
Yes, we absolutely should.
Yeah,
But with
I was about to say,
law?
if I look at Australia, look at America, that's the actual question that could be.
Diet regulation, right? We
Your
need
example
to
you just
control
raised another good
the
question.
population's eating.
So,
I do, and like I think the
Well, I
point
mean,
on law
people are
enforcement is
eating too
actually.
much, and some people. I was going to say, people are eating too much, and some people aren't eating enough, and therefore some people might be dying from the food discrepancy. there is something there too. Anyways.
I think the point that we brought up about law enforcement is a very important one, and it's one that actually has to come into the conversation, because one of the other fundamental arguments for pro-gun ownership is this idea that's kind of lasted since the Second Amendment was originally made to the Constitution, of people don't trust the government, they don't trust law enforcement. And they want some means of protecting themselves for that. I don't know that it's necessarily valid in
or rational.
all of these. Like,
you need a few guns to protect yourself against a tyrannical government nowadays.
Yeah,
probably more than a gun.
We have the largest government,
largest
or
military.
one of the largest military. We spend the
Yeah.
most. I think it's not the largest, but we
I
spend.
think it
the
is the
most
largest.
in the military.
I think it's by far and away too.
It might be.
You guys have got a
We
lot of
spend
guns.
way too much.
That's what
that's for
it's-
sure.
But in any case, it's like that law enforcement. It's a great point of like the reason why we have so many officer-involved shootings is because both sides so many times either have guns or are suspected of having guns, and
Yes.
the police officers
Yes.
have to act for their own safety. And
Yep.
just
Exactly right. That's what I was saying.
if we don't
That's
have
definitely a valid
if-
point.
Yeah, if we don't have like all of those components there won't be as much officer violence, and that will also make people probably feel a lot safer with the law enforcement, instead of like it's especially a problem within the Black community, because there's so much crime that happens in the Black community. Officers tend to profile just by virtue of race.
Yeah.
But it's if we didn't have so much of that, then the issue of gun violence and how many times there's these officer-involved shootings would be so much dramatically reduced. And then on top of that, like, people have made the argument that even if we took out guns, we'd end up in a system like the UK, where the gangs just resort to knife crime, and you have to start controlling that too. And that may very well be the case, but I find it difficult to believe that one person can do as much damage to a crowd of people in as much time with a knife as they could a firearm. A firearm
Yes,
just
exactly.
has the capacity of distance.
So
Mhm.
you have a point, but I think it depends on like, and Sarah, we'll get to your question in a second. It depends on like what we're talking about, because look at, for example, this pandemic. A single person or a small subset of people instantiated this,
Yeah.
right? In a very short partition of time, we've got now 1 million people infected and at least 57,000 people dead.
Yeah.
So it's like, it depends on what we're talking about when we're assessing risk, right? Like the situation really matters. Because I agree with you that a single person, it seems, can do more damage with a firearm in a particular period of time. But at the same time, it depends on the person. I mean, what I mean by that is Ted Bundy. Go ahead.
I was going to say I'd probably be more effective with a martial arts weapon than a gun because I've got no training with guns or anything like that. So I might be able to actually to have a better body count.
I think it's more likely, like I said, that a person trained with a gun can kill more people in a short order of time. But it's kind of like a virus, in that the problem with killing people fast with a gun is a lot like a virus, where if you kill people too quick, it attracts attention and constrains the total number you can kill over time. Much like if a virus has too high a mortality rate without a sufficient incubation period, right? And that's one of the advantages that knives had, is they have the stealth element that can allow you over time to kill more people because it doesn't attract the attention.
But I don't really feel like that applies in the sense of like public violence, because if you're a serial killer, there's any number of ways that you could kill people and just try and keep yourself hidden and kill as many people over however long you're trying to do. But if you stab somebody out in public where anybody else can see you, they're gonna notice, oh shit, that guy just fell to the ground and seems to be bleeding profusely. Something has gone wrong here.
I don't know. It depends, because prisons have this problem all the time. You know, they have shanks. But that's in a very high security environment. You know, shanks are very difficult.
you say it's high security, but
I'm being facetious when I say that.
But it's one of those things where, like, I've actually been to jail. I don't know what anybody else's experience with the criminal justice system is, but like, even here in Travis County, and Travis County has one of the better jails, at least as far as people who are regularly in the criminal justice system seem to say. It has one of the better jails, one of the more stricter policies, guards who are not likely to break policy and bring in contraband into the jail. But even in there was all kinds of shit floating around all over the place. And from at least what I've heard from like anecdotes and documentaries of prison riots, in prison it is easy as shit, if you have the money, to get anybody, like basically any contraband that you would want. There's an entire black market for like cell phones and stuff.
That's what I'm trying to tell you. That's what I'm trying to tell you, is even in a jail, right? People can get shanks easier than you would think. And what I'm trying to tell you is, if you look at a system of differential equations where you look at it kind of like a virus, where rather than something that's being transmitted from person to person, that there's just a method of killing from one thing to another target, right? There's kind of a similar relationship where the rate of killing and the amount of attention it will attract is actually related in such a manner that if it kills too quick, it's kind of like a serial killer in a way, that if they kill too quickly in short order, they'll attract more attention more likely and can kill fewer people over time.
Well, and I'll agree with that to an extent, but in prison too, just specifically the prison environment, that is an accepted part of culture. Like, the inmates will protect other inmates if the violence fit their kind of code with each other, if it was perpetrated for a reason that they can agree with, or even they won't speak up against it just because they don't want to get involved, because you don't get involved with other people's business. And like, a lot of times it's sanctioned by the guards. Like, the guards turned a blind eye to it. So
which means they can't regulate at all, you know?
Yeah, and it's kind of a problem of, like, in that particular environment, the violence is both expected, and it's a system of kind of self-regulation among the criminal population, or the incarcerated population, I should say.
So what do you guys think of Sarah's question here? Because, like, I told her we'd get to it, but we've kind of been...
Oh, my stream froze a while ago, so I can't. I haven't seen anything.
So she says,
I'll read it. Oh, yeah.
It says,
to what extent do you think criminal background checks are important when it comes to purchasing guns? It's astounding what people can get their hands on nowadays.
I actually agree with the criminal background checks.
I don't think many people disagree,
Yeah.
but I think the question
As
is
far as
like to
that,
what
yeah, I
extent,
don't think-
right? The question
yeah.
is to what extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Because as
it's
we were talking about before, with like serial killers and things like that, they have like patterns of behaviors. Like if someone's a serial killer, do you want to give him an AR-15 or whatever? Probably
I don't.
Well,
I
it-
don't.
it-
I don't
if
think
there's-
they're going to use it.
yeah. If there's a serial killer, then they're already the serial killers do not avoid a life sentence or
Yeah,
the
but I
death
mean that's
penalty in
just an
some states.
example sort of thing, and it comes
Yeah.
down like even like when someone's a like frequent domestic abuser, that's another sort of like red flag thing that those people often escalate things to a dangerous level.
I mean,
So
any
it's
any
not-
history of like violence or crime that's involving a firearm, it's like you robbed 2 stores at gunpoint before. No, I don't think we want to sell you this gun. But then the problem always becomes then it's like, okay, those people can't get guns through the verified official channels, but they can absolutely buy one from some guy on the street.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not even
Which is a problem because, like, even if you try to regulate laws that are inefficient and just end up taking up, money for an unproductive cause, you have the issue of potential black markets. And so, like I said, the question is not, I think, whether we should just use laws as a method of curbing behaviors, but whether or not we could be creative and find particular economic incentivations that would have counterintuitive effects that people wouldn't even notice. A good policy. Just 1 second.
Yeah.
A good policy is one that people don't even have to be aware of, but that will implicitly affect their behaviors.
Oh, I would like to ask Duncan a question because, like, I'm curious about the 3D printing of firearms, which is a recent thing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it caught a lot of attention when it just started happening because it's like, well, okay, if anybody with access to a 3D printer, which may become more common in the future, is able
They
to
are.
just print their own firearm, then like how can you stop anybody who wants a firearm from getting one? So I wanted to ask Duncan, has Australia had any sort of problems or measures put in place with the 3D printing of firearms potentially?
See, this is an excellent thing, and it sort of further highlights the huge gulf between America and Australia. Like, we're printing bear coasters and things like that.
All right, so that's partly so that's partly because the complexity of a firearm versus, and remember, you have to have the materials. It's not like a replicator in Star
Yes,
Trek.
you gotta
Okay?
select the bullets
You
and
can't
guns,
just
yeah.
you can't just
You
fucking
can't
print
the whole
shit.
thing.
Like, so in other words, you still need the supplies. Okay, someone can't just print a nuclear bomb if they had like these schematics for it. Okay, so they still need some kind of like applicable.
Springs and screws and
That's not the hard fucking part of it.
and
though.
the cap. There's.
Are you talking about a
I can
nuclear
think-
bomb, or are you talking
No,
about
I
you
guess-
need a hell of a lot more than
Yeah.
Nuclear bomb, I can't say.
Just
A
a
gun,
gun.
I probably could if I had a printer.
Yeah, well, it's
It would take metal pieces anyway to.
well, I mean, there are some 3D printers that can actually print with metal, but you can make
Yes,
a
there is.
working firearm out of like
Just
just
the plastic ones.
high strength plastic polymer, and
Yep.
it's like
I'm actually big into 3D printers. I'm going to get one this year. So I've actually.
yo, you're gonna print a
research.
firearm. This is the thing.
No. The one I want
had
is
to
the,
put a
the
watch on
there's a
Duncan.
Batmobile. Not Batmobile. There's a Batman grappling hook that I saw someone make. And he's like, "Look what I made!" Shoots it up and like goes up. And I'm like, I could make that with a 3D printer. I'm gonna have to seriously consider a 3D printer. I mean, I'm not saying I want to be Batman, but I wouldn't mind the option.
Okay, well,
This
yes,
is
if we
wrestling
lived in a fantasy world, then we probably wouldn't need guns. We would have dragons, and I think that would supersede the need for guns.
I don't know what Westeros
I would
is,
get
I guess,
dragons.
so.
I would definitely go down that route.
But so I think what we can kind of conclude from this discussion is like it's often portrayed as though it's very clear and well defined each side what we should argue for or against, when in reality when you look at these debates, I find them so nebulous and imprecise. And maybe my standards for precision are unrealistic. I'm not expecting like the rigor of like something like an article I would read on particle. All right, by article, when I say that, I'm not talking about some fucking website you would go on about particle physics. I'm talking about the actual accredited journals that I read with all the mathematics and, you know, all the research. I'm talking about that, where you have confidence intervals of at least 5 standard deviations. Like usually I find a level of rigor and a standard of scientific investigation that's absent. And I'm not requiring that level, but it's frustrating that very often what could be productive conversations, and maybe this is evidence of that, are not productive.
I mean, it's definitely a problem with just the polarity of any debate that's become politicized, and especially in America, since America, yeah, it's like America only has like a 2-party system. It's for or against, and both sides are completely convinced of the correctness of their position without necessarily being able to substantiate it. But
a 2-party system in a binary mindset. Sorry.
Yeah, but like I think we can safely say that at least in the world that we live in right now, where some people are still in situations where the best recourse against like wild animal attacks or whatever is for them to have a firearm, we can't just issue a blanket no one gets any firearms.
Right.
Now the question is like, does the situation improve? And we have to come up with metrics for how we determine if the situation is improving. If more people get guns and gun training, or if fewer people have guns. And then that's really, that's the core of the debate is more better or is fewer better?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I do.
Well,
I personally sort of landed the idea of like a little fewer, or at least, as I was saying before, having the things that if you've got a lot of guns, then just make sure that they're just locked up tight so your kids can't get them.
Well, here's
and when I say kids, I don't just mean like 5-year-olds. I mean like your 18-year-olds who are quite savvy at stuff, actually getting into this stuff, and you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be quite smart about how you lock it up.
I think that earlier also our discussion of the graph. You know, when you compare the amount of guns that we have to any other country, I think one thing that people kind of overlook in those graphs, because they immediately go, well, obviously it's the number of guns per capita that could be correlated with the incidence of, you know, violent crime with guns. But you have to ask, why do we have a preponderance of guns to begin with? Because the amount of guns implies a supply and demand equilibrium that exists, meaning there is a demand for this. And so I think one of the important questions is, why does that demand exist?
Yep. And I think that the need to defend yourself is a very real need, and one that shouldn't be entirely discounted. I'm not saying that we necessarily have to have machine guns to defend ourselves with, but it's still something that should be addressed. I also have a few other things that I was actually meant to like discuss through this.
Yeah.
One of them sort of goes to this point that you're just saying about the graph, right?
Yeah.
It's like so this is just like, if gun control is put in place and then there are fewer gun deaths, does that mean that it's a success? And it's like, well, it doesn't automatically mean it's a success, because what about if other violent types of crime goes up? But then if other types of violent crime goes up, does that mean that it's not a success? You have to then go and try and check the long-term data to see if there was an upwards trend before the whole thing in the first place. And it is a hard thing to fully pin down. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I think go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think maybe the most important thing for actually having a meaningful debate is to establish those metrics by which we determine whether the situation is improving. If we can hash out those metrics to say the situation is improved if there are fewer deaths by violent crime, if there are fewer injuries related to guns or gun accidents and all that, if we can
a lower trending than what it used to be, because even if it was going up by 50% every year, and now it's only going up by 25%. You can say, well, it's going up by 25%, but you're looking at then you look at it all and you go, oh, actually, it's gone down a little. Yeah.
But if we can establish like metrics that we all agree with, by which to measure the effectiveness of our policies, then we can start to actually have a meaningful debate and project what kinds of actions and what kinds of policies are likely to lead us in the best direction.
Yeah. All right. So, gentlemen, here's what I think. We can end the conversation here and have just an after party where you guys can bring anyone on from chat to talk, non-live discussion. And I think we can just end the broadcast here. It's gone on pretty long already. And, you know, it's
very good at that. Sorry, guys. I apologize.
Sorry. Well, it's because this topic is rather nebulous already. And so it's what I think we'll have to do in the future is we'll have to narrow the topic to a specific policy or a specific situation.
Yeah.
And then extrapolate from that if we could.
Because I've got that Marshall project that I also wanted to discuss as well. But again, at a later date, we can do so.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll probably have many videos on this topic.
Yeah, I'd like that because this is something that I feel quite passionate about. And I have done a little bit of research in like all my life because I've always been sort of martial orientated, I guess, ever since I was younger. So I've always been into combat and things. Yeah. I've gotten older and I'm much more mellow now, but I've still got all that experience and knowledge from before.
Would you like to invite them with a link?
Yeah, I'll send a link and then I will just end the broadcast. So anyone who wants to continue the discussion can just roll on in.
And the after party is a good idea too, because some people feel nervous about coming in and joining a live stream like this, but they may feel a little bit more keen to join something that's not being put out into air or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Are we still recording it though?
We will not record after I end the broadcast. No.
Okay.
So that's fine. All right, I'm going to end the broadcast now. Anyone who wants to can continue on just by taking the link that I just posted in chat.
Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the after party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.